the younger founder, I focused on things that just weren't medium to long term important. It's probably only now that I'm starting and learning from others that really, once you get to a certain size in a business, you should only be focusing on things that only you can do, and everything else should be done by your team.
Welcome to Founder Fridays, where we sit down with builders who've been in the trenches to talk shop, product, design, and the real lessons no one puts on a slide deck. I'm Alex Dam, and I lead our APAC Startup initiatives at Notion. Today, I'm joined by Dominic Woolrych, co-founder and CEO of Lawpath. So I'm super excited to have this conversation with you, Dom. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Alex. Great to be here.
I guess before we dive in, can you tell us a little bit more about Lawpath? What does your company do? And who are you building it for?
Yeah, sure. So Lawpath is the place that Australian entrepreneurs and small businesses go to get started. A lot of them couldn't afford or didn't have the right resources to actually get up and start running. And so this was especially true around legal, compliance, and accounting. We wanted to put together a platform with as much software and AI as possible to help automate a lot of those tasks. And so we now start about 10% of all businesses that get formed in Australia through our platform. And then we help them with their legal, their accounting, their compliance, to make sure that they can not worry about those things and just get on with running the business.
And I guess taking like a sidestep and going even before Lawpath, like what were the kind of moments in your life that led you to Lawpath? What were you doing before Lawpath?
Yeah, of course. So I call myself a recovering lawyer or a recovering attorney. I started my career as a lawyer. I really loved doing that, but probably two things really impacted me early on in my career as a lawyer. The first one was my dad was an entrepreneur. He ran his own small business, and he didn't know anything about law or tax or anything like that. And every time it came up, it was a huge problem for him, and he would have to go and spend lots of money to get these things sorted out. Lawpath isn't my first startup. I had a few before that, but I really love building things and growing companies and things like that. And so there just became a moment where I kind of it all aligned, and I thought, like, I love building things. I see there's a big problem here that could be fixed in the legal space, and I knew what a customer looked like because it looked like my dad. At the beginning, we were purely legal, and I think what we've learned over the time is that at the end of the day, if you're an entrepreneur or a small business, you've got all these tasks that you need to do. To be frank, you don't care who does them for you. You just need them to get done. And so I think by putting it all into one spot, and especially now that we have 600,000 customers, we can actually start automating a lot more than we used to be able to. Um, because at the end of the day, the really expensive thing about our industry, legal and accounting, is humans. And so if you can minimize the amount of humans, then you can bring the cost down. What we've learned is that you can't fully replace humans. There's always going to be a really important role for them to play. What we're really doing is trying to use software as much as possible, but then at a critical point, we just inject the human when needed.
What were the biggest barriers that you faced with introducing technology into this space that had originally been quite archaic, quite personal from person to person? How did you, I guess, overcome the skepticism that some of these people had?
Part of the process is just educating people that there's a different way that things can be done. I think for a very long time, the legal industry, I think, is the second oldest profession in the world. And the reason, and as you said, it's relatively archaic, and it's always been done the same way. And so the first point of call for us as a business was just educating people that it can be done a different way. And I think a lot of that came down to behavior. And I think as Tom and I sat there at the beginning thinking we can build a robot to do the whole thing. What we probably didn't think through enough was the behavioral change that's required for people just to kind of give up one whole thing and go straight to fully automation. And one of the big pushbacks we got was from the industry. I think, unfortunately, in these service-based industries, the business model is really, the incentive is actually to take more time. The longer I take drafting your agreement, or the longer I take doing your taxes, the more I can charge. And I think really what we're seeing a lot of is fixed price, and that is where you start seeing the advisors, lawyers or accountants, starting to think, how can I use as much software as possible to become efficient as possible? And so I really like these models around the world now that are subscription-based services. So you pay a monthly or an annual fee, because then really, as a small business, you know how much you're getting, or you know how much you're paying, and then it's really all on the supply side to be as effective and as efficient as possible. We partnered with Anthropic pretty early on to build out a large model here in Australia, which we now think is probably the largest kind of SMB legal accounting model, one of the largest in the world. And we put all this kind of flashy advertising all over our website, AI powered, AI this, AI that. And actually, we had a little bit of a reaction from our customers, which was, "You've gone too far." I still want a little bit of hand holding. I don't fully trust AI quite yet. And so what we've now done is kind of pulled back a little bit slightly and said, okay, there's the AI. If you're comfortable and you're probably a little bit further along the adoption curve of using these new tools, go for it. It's there for you. But if you're not and you still want that hybrid option, it's there. Everyone is going through this kind of wave of like, how much do we put AI front and center? How much is it actually? It's just under the hood. The customers, it's still AI powered, but it's not right in front of them. And I think for us, one of the things we've been thinking about a lot this year is moving from a just kind of almost like what I would call iteration one of AI, which is like a chat bot, chat interface, input output type pattern, to more of like a jobs to be done, where one of the things we found is our customers or users, they don't like to give us that much information. So they just want it to happen. And so, it's then on us to go and use APIs or whatever we can to try and find that information for them. And that's when they really see the magic, when they haven't had to do too much input, but they get a really powerful output.
What specific decisions or have you had any kind of pivots throughout your whole time running Lawpath that were crucial to its success, but also its survival in Australia?
We've been through a few iterations. We definitely didn't start the model that is Lawpath now is vastly different to the model that we started with. We started as a marketplace where we would connect lawyers and clients together. It probably wasn't until about 3 years into our journey where we realized that clients were saying, or customers were saying to us, "Hey, a marketplace model is not enough. We want to be empowered to actually do some of these things ourselves." And that's when we really started thinking, well, let's stop building software for lawyers. Let's actually build software directly to the customer, and effectively skip a bunch of the stuff that the lawyer would do. That was a big turning point for us. We saw a lot of adoption after that. You've got two options. You can either commoditize or you can specialize. And I feel like if you're in the middle, you get stuck.
How did you even prioritize which products and or which features to build first?
Think the theoretical answer from any founder is going to say customers. What do customers want?
Mm.
I think the practical answer is money. So, I kind of see my role as like two things, like hire the right people and don't run out of money. If you really boil it down to like what I need to do in this business. In the early days, especially, like where were we just seeing the demand and where could we actually drive the revenue? Because especially in a more complex and technical industry like ours, the product does take longer to develop. And so you do have to have a balance of products that are going to drive revenue straight away or in the short term, whilst you're also building the more complex products behind the hood that are going to have that kind of medium to long term. And so we made a bunch of errors along the way in terms of prioritization. We've been through 5 rounds of capital. I would say we've probably run out of money 5 times as well, um, because you take a risk, you try something, it doesn't work out, and it's I think that probably the very first major pivot for us was that moving from that marketplace to that subscription model, and that was quite a big change. We could keep the customers because they were the same customers, but the supply side, we were suddenly saying to all the lawyers and accountants that worked with us, "Hey, we don't need you anymore. We're gonna try and do this ourselves." And at the point of making the decision, we just needed a lot of conviction that it was going to work. And I think the way we got that conviction was the model before wasn't going to work, and so it was like, well, we have to change something. Um, I think that at that point we were probably down to our last maybe $10,000 or $20,000. So like we had to make a change, and we'd grown that marketplace to a couple of $1 million in revenue. It wasn't a, it had worked. A couple of $1 million revenue business is a great business, but we had aspirations of being a couple of $100 million revenue business. So we knew that we'd hit a bit of a ceiling there, and really moving forward, we couldn't do it. Along the way, you're always going to let people down, especially when you're running a dual, like a marketplace where you've got two sides, because eventually in the end, you have to do one thing for one side of the marketplace that impacts the other thing. And I think we've seen this probably, Uber's the great example, right? There's customers get a cheap ride, or drivers don't get paid a lot, and it's unfortunately it's hard to get that balance. I mean, they try and do a good job of getting that balance, but it's always like a zero sum game. Just if you think about the impact that it can have by going to a software model, it was a bit of a no brainer. Um, and and then the other thing was just the costs. We can provide these solutions now for people so much cheaper, because we've gone more down a software path.
What are you most excited about in, I guess, the next few years?
It's really funny. I think like the non-sexy stuff is the most exciting to me. So
Yeah.
the compliance side. I mean, I honestly never thought I'd be sitting here saying I run a compliance business. When I was at school, that is like probably was the lowest thing on my list of things to do. I think what I've really learned over the last couple of years in terms of what keeps me going is just love building things. And I don't mean like physically building things. I just mean kind of building a team, or building a strategy, or building a company. So if we can keep doing that here, we're also live in the US, so we'll be kind of ramping that up as
Mm.
well. Um, but I think Australia for the foreseeable future will be the big focus.
Yeah, makes sense. And like building a team, and I guess touching on that, you started this with Tom how many years ago?
Almost 10 years ago.
Almost 10 years ago. You're approaching 100 employees now in Australia, or maybe a little bit more now.
Yeah, we're at about 120 now.
Yeah.
And that's gone up and down. And to be honest, when Tom and I sat down 10 years ago and thought we'd build a startup, we thought we'd be sitting on a beach drinking cocktails in 3 years after that. But I think, as every founder knows, that's just not what happens. It's usually a pretty long journey, and it's definitely a journey that doesn't go in a straight line. Tom and I have gone from 2 people to 60 people, back to 10 people. We've been all up and down. Um, I think what you do though over the years is you just build this almost like muscle memory for things. And I think this is why, when I talk to investors, or they're always, there's a reason they look for second time founders. There's a reason that that's a checkbox on their list of kind of criteria, is because you have these battle scars, and you have this muscle memory that just starts to build in. Um, and you
Yeah.
realize that some things are important, and some things are not. And as a younger founder, I focused on things that just weren't medium to long term important. It's probably only now that I'm starting and learning from others that um, really, once you get to a certain size in a business, you should only be focusing on things that only you can do, and everything else should be done by your team. Um, and
Mm.
I think it's hard for a CEO or a founder.
What is this whole experience, a non-linear experience, taught you about shaping shaping, I guess, yourself as a leader, but also shaping the culture of the team at Lawpath?
Well, I think the first learning is if you can have a co-founder on the journey, do it. What I think I've really noticed is it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And on that marathon, you're going to have moments where you've got a bit of energy, and then there's just going to be moments where you don't. You're going to be distracted with something else in your life. You're going to be having kids. You're going to be doing something. And I think the power of a co-founder is that point where you have the energy, they may not. And then you can pull them up, and then it swaps, and then they pull you up. And if you zoom out over the years, I can just see where Tom and I have had those like ebbs and flows. And I really think that in a couple of those moments where I was in an ebb, I may have, thrown in the towel, or I may have said, hey, I'm just going to go back to my cushy legal job because it paid a lot of money. But it was Tom that kind of said, no, like, I'm so motivated. Once you get to a certain size, you don't run the company, you run a team that runs the company. That is what unlocks the bottleneck that a founder becomes. And it then gives you that compounding nature. And the coolest thing happened to me about 6 months ago, which was we launched a new feature and I had no idea about it. Maybe this is me not reading my notes correctly, but I had no idea about it. And I loved that because what had happened is like we had a product team that just went away, found a problem and solved a problem, and I had nothing to do with it. And it really showed me that like the business had grown beyond me and that we were now almost autonomous in what we needed to do. And I'm sure as you get to, the size of companies like Notion and bigger, like that starts just happening more and more. So that's exciting if we can see that happen.
I wanted to touch on just fundraising real quickly as well, because you've gone through a series of fundraising. You recently also got funded as well. That whole process, like, what what's one key bit of advice that you would give other founders when it comes to fundraising?
Whenever I think about fundraising, the word that comes to mind is rejection. And I think that is,
Yep.
you just have to get used to rejection. And I think the light bulb moment for me was that it's not personal. And I think once I figured that out, not only did the conversations become a lot better, but also um, finding investors became a lot easier. And I think one of the big key things here is that the biggest mistake sometimes people make is that they think it's a numbers game, and they think, but just by like blasting out 100 emails to 100 investors, that you'll get a response. And I mean, in a lot of other areas like sales, that works, right? 100 emails, 20 responses, 10 calls, 5 sales, you're good. It's different with investors though, because I've actually found that far more targeted approach is more successful. And what you really need to do, instead of just sending 100 emails, do that work to find out exactly if they are the right person for you. Now, I'm not going to pretend like when someone puts a check in front of you, you don't really care what type of person they are. You just care that you finally got funded. But I think as much as you can balance that need for finding the right person with the funds and also being really targeted. It's hard. One of the other pieces of advice I always see going around is start early, build the relationships early. That is really hard as a founder because you've got millions of things going on. But I think if you build into a systematic process whereby you just say twice a month, I'm going to put a KPI on myself that I'm going to reach out to an investor that fits my criteria, and I'm going to start building that so that when I get to capital raise point, I've got 50 warm people on my list.
I always call it another full-time job that a founder just has to manage with this. Like, you got all those fires, and now you're asking me that I need to speak and build relationships with all these founders. Like, it's another job that you have to
Yeah,
do, and so I totally agree with you.
yeah,
Just moving into kind of the tools, I guess let's pop the hood for a
sure.
minute and see what powers Lawpath.
Let me start with the stack. Well, I'll start at the bottom. So um, we're
Hmm.
on AWS, Amazon, Bedrock. We've got a React front end. We are deeply using a lot of Claude code at the moment. That's been a big shift for us. Our devs now probably churn out 50 to 60% of their code with Claude Code. There's a couple that prefer Cursor, but the mainly are on Claude Code. Um, We then use Figma and Figma Make for all of our product and design type work. We use Notion for our internal documents, systems, things like that. Roadmap, we use Notion. So on the marketing side of things, Salesforce. We've just implemented Gong as well on the sales side. For me, two things that have really 10x'd me recently. So Granola transcriptions, and I have been trying out Notion recordings as well, which I'm very impressed with. And my product team actually prefer Notion just because it's all in the one spot now.
I wanted to finalize on just some rapid fire questions
Yeah,
if you're
sure.
up for it, Dom. Um, First one, Lawpath. What would you have done differently if you were to start again?
I would have hired more senior people faster.
Interesting. And what's one lesson that helped you build better?
Get out of the way. It links to this. Um, Hire great people and give them autonomy to do their job. Like that's it.
Mm,
Sometimes I just think that like that's it. So you know, hire great people that are better than you at their specific domain and get out of the way and let them do their job. Um, is a bit of a mantra for me right now.
yeah. And final one, what's one piece of advice you'd give to a founder just starting out?
If you're not embarrassed by your MVP, you didn't move fast enough. So
There it is.
yeah, I think it's pretty self-explanatory, but your product will change so many times once you get it in front of customers. Don't wait for it to be perfect. Just get it in front of customers.
Dom, thank you very much for your time,
Thanks,
and
Alex.
it's a pleasure to have you on here.
Really enjoyed it. Thank you.